I'm really excited to be here today, and I am really excited to have followed Hani and Beauty as well. I feel like their information on differentiated learning and learning styles is a really nice jumping off point for what I hope can be sort of contribution of my own expertise, which I see as grounded a little bit more in our local student population. So I feel a little under-researched compared to my colleagues. But what I really wanted to do today was talk to you about our students here at USM and my successes and lack of successes in reaching those students. And so I was really torn as to how I wanted to do this. And I talked to my friend Danielle, and she asked me a nice question. She said, if this weren't your passion, if this wasn't something you did because you wanted to, if it had nothing to do with personality, nothing to do with writing, then what would you tell people they needed to know to be successful teaching students at USM? And that really sort of helped me think about reaching students in ways that I think are interdisciplinary, that cross class size, that cross our disciplines, and that I think, with adjustments I'm sure, would work in most cases to reach students who traditionally are deemed underprepared. So the first thing that I think is important and that I stress with graduate students in the English department is that I don't have enough handouts, I'm sorry, and I don't have a PowerPoint, I'm sorry, but is knowing your student demographic. And I think one of the worst things we can do is step into the classroom here at USM and not understand the students who are sitting there and the stories that they bring with them. Originally, I had intended to show you a video, an excerpt from Lolly's Ken, which is an HBO Oscar-nominated documentary about the Mississippi Delta that details the ways that politics intersect, or not politics, I'm sorry, that education and poverty intersect. It's also political. And it's a really strong piece. And if you haven't seen it, I highly suggest that you watch it. Because unlike most things Mississippi, it doesn't stereotype. It's not saying this is Mississippi and it's filled with poverty and it's horrible and this is why things are bad. Lolly's Ken, and if you, well, you probably don't have a handout because you're in the back, but on the handout there's a picture of it and there's also a source, yes.
We'll have a handout on the wiki that goes with the teaching forum after today, if you'll email it.
Yes, most certainly. But essentially Lolly's Ken profiles one family as well as the Tallahatchie School District and talks about this family's struggle in the most minimal of things. They don't have running water. This was shot in 2001. Their kids don't go to school one day because none of them have pencils, right? And so I'm not suggesting that this particular documentary illustrates for us with broad strokes our student population. What I am saying is that those are some of our students, and I'm also saying that those stories mean a lot when they're in the classroom and that we have to understand that. If you look at the handout, you'll see I've given you some statistics about students here at USM. And I think it's important that we realize that 84% of our students are from Mississippi. This is meaningful when we think about how we teach our classes. In addition, many of these students never want to leave Mississippi. That is also meaningful in how we teach our classes. You'll also see I've included things like ACT scores. The average ACT score at USM is 22.1. Over a third of our students come into our institution needing remediation of some sort. Over a third score below a 20 on the ACT. Now, the ACT is not an indicator of intellectual capabilities in any way, form, or fashion. It can, however, be an indicator of preparedness. And so what we have to learn from that is not, wow, our students can't do this, but rather, wow, our students have not been prepared to do some of the things we want them to do. How can we change those factors? In addition, you can see that 47% of our students are on federal Pell Grant, which gives you an idea of the socioeconomic class of our students. And one of my favorite statistics, actually, because I think it's something we should be very proud of, is that our student population mirrors the state population. We have the most diverse student body in the state of Mississippi. And that is amazing, and it's rewarding. Does it bring challenges? Certainly it does. But what it really should do is enrich our classrooms that much more if we figure out how to, using many of the strategies that my colleagues have presented, reach all of the students in our classroom. So my main sort of, stick, I guess, is we need to understand our students. But we also need to understand how their stories influence the way they learn. For me, this moment came while teaching at USM out of sheer desperation. I was struggling, and I was not reaching a number of my students, and I didn't know why. They weren't doing what I told them to do. I mean, sort of just the bare instructions, like, I just want you to do this. Why aren't you? You don't want it. I don't get it. And at that time, I read Lisa Delpit's Other People's Children, and that's also in your handout. And in this particular text, Delpit relies a lot on Shirley Bryce Heath's Ways with Words and the way discourse communities inform how we learn. And this was an eye-opening experience for me, because I realized that in spite of the fact that I grew up on free and reduced lunch all my life, my parents have college educations, my grandparents have college educations. So even if not fiscally, I grew up in a mainstream middle-class white household. And therefore, that's pretty much how I taught. So when my parents, for instance, would come and say, if it was time for a bath, they would come and say, Joyce, don't you think it might be time to take a bath? They weren't really asking me a question, right? I knew that. And so when I went to college and a faculty member would say, I've put 2 articles on reserve outside my office in an envelope, and it might be a nice idea if you go and read that. I think it'll be helpful in preparing for your test. I didn't take that as a suggestion. I took that as something I was supposed to do, and there would be penalties if I didn't. What I realized in reading this book is that there are students in my class who don't grow up with soft prompts and suggestions and questions. They grow up with directives. And nobody ever asked them if it was time to take a bath. They said, get your butt in the bathtub. And so all of a sudden I thought, wow, how much of this is miscommunication? If I can rethink the way I give instructions in my class, and I can be clear and give directives, not the suggestions that I find to be polite and helpful in my own world, then there isn't going to be that same kind of miscommunication. So that was a really important learning experience for me. And after that, I felt like, wow, this is going to work out. Because now if students don't do things, I can feel pretty good about assuming they've made that choice. It's not because of miscommunication, because I know that I've been clear about my expectations, about the rewards for meeting them, and about the penalties for not doing so. This may make me, they might not like me, some of them for that, but at this point, I feel much more confident that I'm reaching those students and they know what I want from them. So the other sort of global issue that I think is important with our students here at USM is understanding your own teaching personality. And I know that sounds sort of unique and individual to all of us, and it is. I joke in the office that I'm sort of a get-in-your-grill kind of teacher. I don't have space issues. I don't mind being confrontational with a positive undertone. Those are things that I really enjoy. And for students who are struggling, for me, that tends to work out really well. But that's something I'm comfortable doing. I think all of us as faculty have to figure out how we can reach students who are struggling using our own strengths as teachers. For some faculty, that's just listening. For some, that's putting students in a position where you ask the question, you put the ball in their court, and they know you care enough to let them work it out, even if they are doing most of the talking. There are a number of strategies, I think, to use what you do well to reach students that you previously would not have thought that you can reach. It's just a question of sitting down with them, and I think most importantly, saying to them, I want your success. We're not headed in the right direction right now. How can we possibly go in that direction? So, in light of those 3 global sort of concepts, I decided to make a list of things that I do in my own classes that I think will transfer to just about any class, because I was concerned that people would say, well, you're easy to say, you get to go teach 20 students writing, and it's intimate, and you don't have to grade 200 essays or give all these exams, and you're right, I don't. I do have that luxury, and it's fantastic, and I wouldn't give it up for anything. But I do think that some of these things will work in other classes as well. So the first one is, I think it's important to assess a low-stakes assignment early in the semester, all right? In the English department, what we do is the first week of classes, every teacher in a composition course assigns a writing sample. No intention of grading that writing sample. What I do with that writing sample is I read it, I look through to see what problems students might be having so I can think about what I need to cover that semester, but then I also create piles. This student in all likelihood will not have any problems with writing in my class. These students, however, may have real problems with writing in my class. And then here's a group of students in the middle who I'm a little bit concerned about, but maybe with the right pushes and right instruction, they're going to be okay, right? And that's helpful to me as a teacher. It also helps me go ahead and target students from the beginning to know who I think is going to have problems. In English, again, another luxury, we have a backup class. So I can go to these students who show real potential problems and say, we have another class that you can take, and I want you to be successful, and I think that this might be a really good means to your success, right? Not everyone has that option, but I do think that you can sit down and talk with students and think about sort of what they may need to do outside of class to be more successful if those initial sort of looks at their work or writing suggest that they need additional help. The other thing, and this is a lot of work, but if you have TAs, maybe they can do it for you, is to send personalized emails to students. Students just want to know you care. They just want to know that someone out there is thinking of them. And so I had to send, in an honors class last week, 2 emails saying, hey, you didn't come to class. What's up with that? Do you not love us anymore? I didn't say that. But I think you have to make that effort. And whether that's a form email that you send to students, or whether it's individualized per student, or whether your RA sends it for you, I don't know that it really matters. I think what matters is that students have someone sort of poking them saying, you're supposed to be here, and I want you to be here, and you can be successful if you come here. And I think that means a lot to students. I also think that we have to emphasize critical reading skills. If I were pressed to say what I think the #1 deficit our students come to us with, I would say it is reading skills. Even our strongest readers, I would argue, have been taught to read in a way that only emphasizes the most global. Who are the main players? What is the main argument? The nuances escape them. So if that's the case with our strongest readers, you can only imagine students who grew up in homes without books. They do not know how to read critically for our classes. And they don't understand that reading in every discipline is just a little bit different, and that you're looking for different things. So I would encourage you to model for your students how you expect them to read for your class and your discipline. And I don't think this takes very long. I think you can have a 20-minute session in which you tell whoever your book publisher is, I want access to the online version of this book, and you project it, and as a class, you go through it, and you help them understand what the important elements of the text are. And I think you will find that your students will do a much better job reading for your classes after you've shown them exactly what you expect. Because we tend to have them get there, and then we get frustrated because they don't have answers, or we supply them for them. We never show them how to do it. And I do think that that's part of our responsibility. Some of these things are obvious, and you're probably all thinking, these are really obvious. Save 5 minutes for the end of class for wrap-up. We cannot assume that our students got it. I do some really cool activities in class that I walk away thinking, man, that rocked. I was on today. And then I'll realize next time they didn't know why we did it. And if they didn't know why we did that activity, then that's probably a problem. So I think you'll find it valuable at the end of class to just sort of talk about what you did. And for me, in my classes, I don't do enough of this. But what I try to do is at the beginning, I may be the one to tell them, right, what we're doing. But then as class, as the semester progresses, I want them to tell me. What was the purpose of this activity? Why did we do this? How does it relate to the writing project you're doing right now? And I find that this is very helpful. Obviously, you want variety. I'm not saying entertain your students. I realize that's not our job. But I do think you want to vary things up and do your best to keep students engaged. We have a student population now that is going 20 miles a minute, and it's constant, and it's image, and it's text. And they're reading more than they've ever read. It's just coming out them so quickly that they're not used to sitting still and to having things be the same way. So I think we have to think about that when we're designing our classroom sessions. I would suggest you set guidelines in class in the beginning about what your class is going to look like, about what your expectations are, about how to be a good citizen in your class. Because I think the more students understand that being in academics and being in college is about a different kind of citizenship, the more successful they'll be and the more responsibility they'll take on themselves to play a role in your class as a citizen. I think you have to use examples that are meaningful to students. Again, not an attempt to say entertain, but you know what? The things that were entertaining and meant something to me don't mean anything to my students. Absolutely nothing. So, for example, when I'm talking about education and I'm teaching education, I'll bring out videos like Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall. My students have never heard of Pink Floyd. They've never seen the video Another Brick in the Wall. It's very distressing to me every time. But then I will bring out Eminem and D12's Revelation, which is a rap that is not for the sensitive of heart, I don't think. But it's brilliant, and it's a spoof on Another Brick in the Wall. And my students relate to it. So they get the video of Pink Floyd, but it means nothing to them. And then I show them this Eminem D12 video, and it clicks, okay? I use box fugues to teach synthesis. I use Facebook to teach rhetorical analysis. Am I pandering to them? Perhaps a little bit. But I also think it makes my class more culturally relevant. I think it makes me a better teacher, and it forces me to learn new things. I've learned 3 new words this year, and it's been the best year ever because I now know what a brony is. And if you want to know, I'll tell you later because it's really cool. In addition, I think you have to be willing to learn from your students. I think you have to listen to them, and I think you have to think from their perspective and know that they have amazing stories, and that diversity is what makes it rich. And if you're not willing to listen to them, then I think you're losing a whole element of the class that can take it to that next level of critical thinking, and that can enrich their peers' understanding of your course content as well. So that's it.